Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be taking a retrospective look at an album that came out last January, Vessel by 21 Pilots. Now, look, there are some times that there are good acts that just slip the net. They might be great bands deserving of a ton of critical acclaim and a lot of attention, but they just come out at the wrong place, the wrong time, and they just get missed or they get lost in the shuffle. Look, it sucks, but believe me, but you know what, it happens. Now, granted, there is a reason why I didn't cover the major label debut of 21 Pilots back when it came out. My blog was inactive because work was consuming all of my time, and my music reviewing was kind of placed on the back burner. So in this slow period of releases, I figured now is the best time that I could check out their debut album titled Vessel. And I'll be very honest and say that I know very little about this band, outside of them being a young, synth-driven, alternative rock hip-hop duo out of Columbus, Ohio. And this album, well, it appears to be another one of these put together with new songs and old songs, which means we're probably not going to get a lot of album consistency and coherency, but then again, that's disappointing, but it's kind of expected with major label debuts in this day and age, even from A-list artists. Now, they're also signed to Fueled by Ramen, which is a good sign for me, because that's one of the labels that has a fair standard of quality when looking at mainstream pop rock acts like Panic! At the Disco, Fall Out Boy, Gym Class Heroes, Cobra Starship, Fun, and Paramore. In fact, 21 Pilots were the opening act for Fall Out Boy this year on the Save Rock and Roll tour, so they're probably pretty solid, right? Well, actually, they definitely are. Make no mistake, Vessel by 21 Pilots is a very good, possibly even great album, and one that I enjoyed a great deal. But at the same time, it's also the sort of album where I am not surprised at all that these guys didn't take off in the same way, because they are a marketer's nightmare. It's not even that they're bad or even all that weird, but I could imagine sitting in meetings with the promotion teams, they just exchange glances and exclaim, "Screw it, I give up." They have a distinctly unique sound, and one that I happen to like, but at the same time, they straddle two genres that don't often work well together. And while I think 21 Pilots mostly pull it off with this album, the hangups that I do have with this band mostly come from this area. Now, let's start with the instrumentation and production, the latter of which is solid work by Greg Wells and is better than one might expect from a band in this vein. That's mostly because 21 Pilots are barely a rock band, as the closest thing they have to guitars are a ukulele and a keytar. And the fact that Wells actually manages to make these instruments have some presence and heft in the mix is really something special, given that the melody lines are borderline chiptune at points. Now, of course, the big upside to 21 Pilots primarily being a keyboard-driven act is that we finally get some interesting melody lines in a pop rock song, complete with stylistic shifts. Mid-song gets into tempo changes that suggest some serious instrumental songwriting chops, and yet with enough populism to keep the melodies catchy and interesting. And yet, for a band that's crying out to have dance beats crammed into their material, you don't really get that with Vessel, as the band might only have one or two songs with a heavier backbeat, and they mostly stick with an organic drummer. That being said, for a band with as much of a theatrical edge as they do, it's a little bit frustrating that they don't opt for more organic swell in their instrumentation. I think the band is crying out for a bass guitarist at least at some point. I mean, they used to have one. They probably should look to bring one back, at least for session musicians or something. Now, I mentioned that 21 Pilots had a theatrical bent, or at least a desire to make their music convey some dramatic weight. I'm a little surprised that they managed to pull it off, but if we're going to be looking for a weak point in this whole formula, it would probably be their frontman, Tyler Joseph. Now, let me make this clear. He's by no means bad. His singing is solid enough for his genre, the falsetto is quite good, and his screaming, well, it's better than some screaming I've heard so far this year. The place where a lot of people will criticize him will be in his rapping. Oh yeah, he raps on this album. But honestly, he has more coherent verses, rhyming, and punchlines on this album than most mainstream rappers who dropped albums this year, looking at you 2 Chainz. No, my issue is more in his flow. Kind of analogous to Big Sean, he comes across as distinctly awkward and somewhat self-effacing, and that's not always the best fit for this sort of material, at least with his particular delivery style. He comes across as very much younger than his age, and while he does have a fair amount of charisma, you can tell it's not hugely polished yet, and it doesn't quite have the vocal presence to truly anchor these tracks and give them some real punch. But then again, this is a debut album, and I'm confident that sort of little bits of inexperience will go away with time. So, what about those lyrics and songwriting? Well, as with The Neighborhood, it's definitely in emo territory, but it's the good kind of emo songwriting that displays a lot more wit and solid songwriting talent than most. It speaks to teenage angst, but it does so with smart songwriting and actual nuance. See, this is how you do emo properly. In fact, if 21 Pilots has one big strength in their favor, it's their technical songwriting skills, because the well-composed and memorable rhymes on these tracks, they're shockingly good. For me, the rhyming cadence is distinctly reminiscent of My Chemical Romance. And while 21 Pilots doesn't quite have the lurid flair and bombast that band did, they make it up for it with confessional and revealing songwriting. Most of the songs are focused on struggles with inner demons, like with Paranoia, Despair, how one deals with fame and their audience in songs like Screen, or on collapsing relationship, or even on the extreme pain caused by migraine headaches. But 21 Pilots also has a knack for tackling larger issues, like the self-destructive and increasingly lethal manner how some teenagers act out in Guns for Hands, one of the album's standout tracks. And yet, the band also does the smart thing and never actually plays themselves as outside of their audience. They try to identify with them, and they show that sprig of populism, and it really works in their favor. It also definitely helps matters that the band has a fair amount of self-awareness, with Tyler Joseph actually admitting that when and if he raps on one of his tracks, he's not going to get radio airplay in the same way, which really is a big shame, because his punchlines here could put Big Sean or 2 Chainz to shame any day. And sure, there are some melodramatic moments on this album, but in this particular genre, that's kind of to be expected, and they do fit Tyler Joseph's delivery, which adds enough authenticity to excuse them. Now, there's one notable dud on this album, and it is House of Gold, which seems to be a tribute to his mother. Look, it has a decent melody, but it's still ridiculously dorky, and it just doesn't work for the mood of this record, all things considered. But look, in the end, I really enjoyed Vessel by 21 Pilots, and I definitely recommend you check it out if you didn't when it came out in January. Is it flawed and a bit of a genre-hopping mess? Well, a little, but it executes the fusion of hip-hop and emo surprisingly well, and most of the issues I have with the band are likely linked to debut album problems that will go away upon future releases. I still think they're crying out for some stronger instrumentation, or at least a bass guitar, because with their relatively restrained beats and production, we'll probably confine them to the status of curiosity pieces, which is really unfair to this band, because I'm giving them an 8 out of 10. But that being said, I think there is definitely room for improvement. I'm excited to see where this band is looking to go. If you're looking for an act that combines Big Sean, My Chemical Romance, some love with Devo, the Beatles, and Queen, plus a load of industrial strength awkward, 21 Pilots are definitely the band of which you've been looking for. Everyone else, look, they're still a ton of fun, and they're definitely worth your time to check, so you should definitely check them out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. If there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or if there's any other albums you'd like me to cover at some point this year, I'd be more than happy to take a look. Until then, see you next time.